My guest today is Alexa Lombardo, a seasoned brand strategist who truly embodies the Web3 native idea of a contributor. She has her own agency called Atomic Number 8. She is a primary contributor at Gitcoin, one of the oldest brands in Web3 that creates tools to fund what matters. Alexa started her career in corporate strategy in major health and beauty brands, including Estee Lauder and Unilever, before moving to the brand strategy side in the same industry. Curious about the difference between brand strategy and corporate strategy? We discussed that in the show. After discovering Web3 and the ability to bring people together to effectuate a purpose, Alexa has gone deep on what it takes to build a sustainable future for this space. We get a masterclass on building thriving communities and the history of collectives in general. Alexa drops some serious earned knowledge, so listen carefully. LFG baby, let's start vibing.
Zach French is a bar-certified attorney, and nothing expressed by Zach during Web3 with me shall be considered legal advice. All the opinions expressed by Zach and his guests are solely their own opinions. All content in Web3 with me is for informational purposes only. Zach and his podcast guests may maintain positions in the securities discussed during Web3 with me.
Welcome to the show, Alexa.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, I've been super excited about this. I have a little birdie in my ear who happens to be my best friend and cousin named Alon Miller, who does a lot of what you do. Not nearly as much, by the way, which we'll get into later on in the episode. But ever since our virtual coffee conversation, I've been excited for this. So I usually start these conversations by letting the audience get to know you better. What makes Alexa Alexa? So give us your founding story and feel free to start wherever you'd like.
Yeah. I'm Alexa. I was born in right outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So that goes way back. But in my kind of professional life, I'm a brand strategist / marketer / just a lot of different things. I see myself as more of like a generalist. So I've done a lot. I've done a lot of kind of jobs here and there throughout my career, or worked in a lot of different areas of marketing or brand. And so I feel like in that sense, I have I have the ability to connect dots. And so I'm oftentimes finding myself in kind of that position. And that all kind of fits into what I call the category of like brand strategy. But I started my career working in, large corporations like Estee Lauder and Unilever. I was in corporate strategy, and then I moved into brand strategy, then kind of brand marketing and product marketing. And then I got really involved on the creative side with a couple of brands that I worked with. And then I started consulting and really enjoyed that, and really loved pairing the brand strategy work and the product work with the creative work. And so about 4 years ago, I started my studio, Atomic Number 8. Atomic Number 8, the actual Atomic Number 8 is oxygen. So sort of the positioning was like oxygen for brands. So working with heritage brands to kind of breathe new life into them, and then work with founders on building brands from the ground up. And was working primarily with kind of beauty, health, wellness brands. And then we went into kind of wellness tech, health tech, a little bit of ed tech, food tech. And then when the iOS changed, a lot of my clients that I was working with, just overnight, essentially their budgets were slashed. And I was like, we need some new marketing tactics that don't rely on Meta. And we need to come up with them quickly. And so I was watching what was happening in the Web3 NFT space. And I was watching these brands really leverage like these evangelized communities. And I was just like, wow, this is like the future. It's going to be like the brand is owned by the community. The community is responsible for the marketing. Everyone is an empowered marketer. Everyone is an empowered product developer. There's a place for everyone. And there's a sense of like two-way value creation or shared value creation. And so I took it upon myself to really like dive deep into the space. I thought that I was going to be spending more time like taking what I was learning back to my like kind of Web 2 clients. That's been really challenging. So I've sort of gone like full steam ahead into Web 3 because it's really fun. It's really energizing. I believe in this technology. The people in this space are incredibly talented and inspiring and really energizing. So sort of now I I still have the studio and we still definitely do project work. But I actually spend the bulk of my time on doing kind of like deep strategic work with a couple of, I wouldn't even call them, like, they're not clients because they're like, I am a contributor. And so one of those is Gitcoin. There are a couple of other ones that I've been working with, and a new one that I'm really excited to start with next week. And really the bulk of that work is the strategy piece. With Gitcoin, we just did a sort of brand refresh light, I would say. There's a lot more evolution in our future with that, but that was an amazing project. And now I'm working on with the teams on sort of what's the branding look like for the different products, et cetera. And that's sort of where I am today. I live in Brooklyn, but I split my time between Brooklyn and London, East London. So I'm headed there in a couple weeks. So for those of you who are either Brooklyn based or London based listening to this, please hit me up. I love like collaborating. One of my friends through Web3 is coming over to co-work today. I pretty much like don't have like, I don't believe in like work-life balance. I kind of like, it's like work is my life, or it's part of my life in the same way that like socializing is part of my life. I host a lot of game nights. What else? My hobbies include skiing, sailing. Yeah, that's like me in a nutshell.
I love it. I love it. It sounds like you're very much a follower of your passion, and
Totally. Yeah.
you like to surround yourself with similar people. The actual connecting dot between us was your friend Diana Richter,
Yes.
who was a former guest on the show. Amazing human, also lives in London.
Totally. Also, we were just on a ski trip together. So when I say there are no boundaries between work and life, there's no, just live in.
I love that. I love that.
To borrow a quote from Matthew McConaughey, who is, truly a wise voice in my life.
I love that. You're the first person that's ever quoted Matthew McConaughey on the show.
Just keep living. Yeah. He's great. He's great. I've got some more quotes in there. Maybe I'll pepper them in throughout.
Let's go. Those are the best one-liners to throw in like the YouTube shorts and stuff. So I want to go back though to the beginning. You started in corporate strategy, you went to brand strategy, you found your creative side. How do you define strategy?
I mean, I think it's sort of like life is either like solving problems or building solutions, right? So like strategy, you could position that as either one of those things. You don't want to build solutions for problems that don't exist, yet you don't want to always be looking like backwards at like just problems. So it's sort of a balance between those two things, I would say. And I get this question a lot, like business strategy versus brand strategy. Like, what's the difference? What do you do? Brand is like a very like emotional thing. Brand is not something that is like owned by the business unit. Even if they say they own it, they really don't. Brand is the audience, user, community, whatever you want to call it, interpretation, and how they take in sort of all of those brand expressions and how it makes them feel. So that's kind of brand strategy, whereas business strategy is like, what are our goals, objectives, like KPIs? The two are definitely intertwined because brand should support your business goals. But it's one way of driving that, right? So your business goals or your business strategy is also encompassing of product. It's also encompassing of oftentimes like, how do we architect a community? Like there are lots of things that go into business strategy, primarily like whatever you're selling, right? That's like the one thing. And then there are other ways, like other levers, right, that you pull. So it might be, regional expansion. It might be pricing. Like that's like more business, whereas brand is like all of those other, like how do we like emotionally connect? And then those other elements certainly tie into it. But a lot of what the way people connect with the brand is more about like the visuals, the tone of voice, the different touch points, right? The different like ways that you can cultivate like an emotional bond. And so I do both of those things. but primarily like my passion is where it is connecting, like that emotional connection, which is why I love brand and brand strategy. And I think it's a tough sell, because for a long time it's been like a big investment, like to invest in brand. But actually, if you really break it down, like it's pretty simple. Like, and I that's why I love like word of mouth marketing, because it's like and brand is sort of like a part of that. But yeah, so that's sort of how I define those two things. Did that answer the question?
That was great. How do you see the role of corporate strategy versus brand strategy, and brand strategy in Web3? Like what
Yeah.
state are we in there? Should we be focusing more on one? Are we currently focusing more on one? What are you seeing?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's funny. A walkie just tweeted like this quote that was like, culture will always be more important than strategy, or something like that. I'm butchering the quote. Literally, like seconds before I hopped on here, and I was like, yeah, but like we still need strategy. I think like going back to what I said before, like you can't in Web3 in particular, it's a little bit harder to like architect these things, right? They don't exist in a vacuum. They don't exist in a boardroom. They are the byproduct a lot of times. If you're a decentralized brand, I should say, or if you're a decentralized organization, it is something that you have to kind of cultivate more organically. But there is a lot of like massaging that you can do within an organization. So I think it's just a different approach, but it's not to say that these organizations should be without a strategy. It's just a different approach to how you define that strategy, in my opinion. And I think you really want to align and engage a group of people in some kind of like vision or North Star, but then you also want to be able to, you can't rely on a vision to get people to that goal, right? Like you have to break it down further and define like, how are we going to get there? And if people don't have that, it causes them to be like really confused. It causes a lot of like spinning of wheels, and it causes a lot of like bad products to be made. So I think like it's not about like the strategy and being so rigid in it. It's about like defining a certain set of like short-term and long-term goals that like people can work towards and have like and create meaningful contributions around. Otherwise, you just get people like, it's just chaos, in my opinion. And I actually think that decentralized organizations like need more process and more structure in a lot of ways in order to operate effectively. Like this idea of decentralization, like independent contributors just going off and doing stuff, like that doesn't really work. And like you're going to run out of money to fund these things, unless like the community, there's an appetite for it, for what you're doing, and then the community can fund it. And there are certainly a ton of mechanisms out there for people to spin out their own thing and do their own thing within a decentralized org. But like I think you need to have some structure in place. So not so much corporate strategy, just as like business strategy. And like corporate, I think you put that label on it and everyone is just like, no, I don't want to touch that. We're not corporate, anti. But just because we're all here trying to like change the world or reinvent systems, or create new systems, doesn't mean that we have to like buck everything and like throw everything that has worked out the window. I think we need to like take what works and then like adapt it to these new like working realities. And I think that that also, by us doing that, by us taking like these things that have worked and adopting them, it also brings us closer to the status quo. And so that will make people be like, oh, that organization has a really great strategy. I can see it. I see where they're going. Or that organization is a brand that I believe in. I can trust it. That's what's going to get the next million users, billion users into Web3. It's not just like YOLOing, having no structure, no path, because how do you get people like to get on board? And yes, there are some incredible leaders in this space who just are so great at motivating and making people feel empowered. But at the end of the day, if you want to really build like a sustainable organization, I think you need certain like structures in place. I'll caveat that by saying like it should not be so rigid that you feel like constrained or confined, and it should not be like overly prescriptive. It should definitely be more of like a living, breathing thing that evolves. And I find that that's the challenge with a lot of corporate strategies. They're planning so far out, they can't really see the trees through they're only looking at the forest. So like I think a lot of orgs have the problem where they can't see the forest, the trees. And I think corporates have the problem where like they can't actually like see the individual pieces and how they need to like alter their strategy because they're so focused on like what the vision is or the longer term things or the strategy itself. And I think that like vision without like kind of the mission and the pieces that ladder up to that is just kind of useless.
That's interesting. So it's almost like there's a good balance between what's being done in this, traditional corporate business world and what is being created with the values and the decentralization and the contributor style model of Web3.
Totally. Yeah, completely. And I mean, I think that like, it's funny because we're building products or we're building brands or we're building whatever we're building, like that's not what's revolutionary, So think about how things get made, how things get built. Like that, like there are certain things that like you need to do in order to like build something that gets used by users or consumers. I know we don't like that word, but not all of your users will be contributors. Like that's just not, or if that's the case, then like that is challenging. However, like you can have your contributors be users, which I think is definitely valuable. But I think thinking about like what we can borrow from, more traditional industries or whatnot, and then what value we can add to those, so that people like can see themselves in Web3 more, and it doesn't feel like just such this like it can feel very intimidating or very just like foreign. And so I think if we can borrow more from like what has worked and like then incorporate our new ways, new mechanisms that are working for us and that are laddering up to those values, and that's sort of the end goal that I see. And I think a lot of organizations are realizing that, and I think that's why there's sort of Web 2.5 concept has emerged. And I think that for certain organizations, there is value to that. There's value to being able to connect with the Web 2 world sooner rather than later. For some, it doesn't, they're so steeped in Web3, it doesn't really matter. And like, that's not part of the goal, and they can't be focusing on that audience because they're so, the Web3 world is relying on them or whatnot. Organizations like Uniswap, for example, right? Like they don't, although I do think that like user acquisition, like, will be more important, but like for now there's such a big fish in this small pond that like it's working. But we have to grow Web3. So like we have to grow our, the amount of users in this space. Otherwise we're all going to fail. So I think like more orgs that like look towards that, and rather than kind of like these like circle jerks that are kind of emerging, sorry, unpopular opinion / like maybe inflammatory language, but like I think it's important to like invite other people to the table, like bring more people to the party. And so orgs that like can be like, we want to be that person, we want to be that organization to do that. I think that's like really powerful, and maybe it is too early, but I think it will be necessary.
I love that. Now I know why Diana recommended you for the show.
Diana is like one of my favorite people in the whole world. So
I have to say, you're preaching to the choir here. That's my whole goal with the show, is to make people realize that working with corporate partners, adopting strategies and ideas and tactics that have worked before is not like the end of the world. Like you're not sacrificing your identity by doing that. I think that you put it beautifully earlier when you said there's a balance, right? There's certain brands or certain things that you do within brands in Web3 that are just uniquely Web3, right? I don't think every Web2 company should have a Discord, right? Like for instance, it's like a really like a really broad example, but like that there's certain things that you don't need to do, right? And not every consumer brand should have an NFT. right?
Totally. Yeah, it's funny. I work with Protein and Protein Community a lot. They're an agency based. Well, they're primarily based in Amsterdam, but also London. And they worked on the Nike Swoosh project, which was I don't know if I'm allowed to share, but sorry, Will, if I'm not allowed to share. But the original brief was to create a Discord community, and they were like, "No, like, don't do this. This should not be the route." And that's like Web3. Like what I think Protein is doing a really great job. They have like this extension of their agency, which is the community, and it's a lot of more Web3 native individuals. So they bring those to the table when working with bigger clients. Super unique value proposition that I feel like bigger agencies should follow, because you've got big agencies, people who aren't really steeped in the space, and they're like proposing these very costly initiatives that brands follow through with, they don't see an ROI on, and then they abandon Web3. If you work with an agency that they're, obviously brands with big budgets, they want to work with established agencies. They're not going to go to the Web3 agencies. That's why I think it's really smart to have like a Web3 kind of arm or community of your agency that you can pull talent from. Anyway, that's to say what Swoosh ended up with is just purely like kind of Web 2.5. It's like existing only on Instagram. They're using like, I think, a wallet integration tool that makes it just a super seamless experience. And so I think, if they had gone the Discord route, all of their NFT, like bots would have descended. They would have lost user trust. Like people would have abandoned it. And I think we've seen that with a lot of these other projects. And so finding like that balance is like what these big brands need. And these big brands can like inject cash into this space. Unfortunately, a lot of these initiatives have sort of fallen flat. And so they're not willing to invest right now. And I think that's, a challenge. And I think there needs to be more of an effort between, these bigger corporates and these sort of smaller, like Web3 native orgs, or like the agencies that are like the go-betweens between the two, to actually like partner and really like, like create more meaningful experiences or activations. Otherwise, like I'm a little worried. But I definitely feel like there are, some new protocols and tools that are kind of actively trying to bridge that gap, whether it be, cocreate or unlock or playground. Like they're emergent, but I think there's definitely something that I think that's sort of like the direction for creating more of a partnership, I guess.
Yeah, I think having gone through the what am I going to do in Web3, but I know I want to be here carousel in my own career, the natural tendency for someone that has degened on NFTs or degened in DeFi for a long time is like, I can be a community manager. You guys should totally set up a Discord, and then you should totally launch an NFT, and then you should launch more NFTs, and you're going to have all this extra revenue. And like that's taking from someone who's never done strategy consulting for a business before. And it was okay at that point for them because they're like, oh, you have this many NFTs and you've done this, and Web3 is hot right now. Well, now that Web3 is not hot, right? You're starting to realize that you've got to take a step backwards and start to trust the people who have built out this stuff before.
Yeah. And community management is not, I go in the Discord and I say GM. Like that is not, community management is thinking about like, what does this community need? What are the systems? What are the tools? What are the, things that are going to be meaningful to them? Like what are the kind of events, or what do we want to create to get, like all of those things, like that's community management. And I think for some reason it became, I manage the Discord and therefore like I moderate or whatever, but like, no, like community management also is like not the responsibility of a single person. You can have definitely people like own it, right? And like own parts of it. But like we as community members are also community managers. And like we need to take that accountability on ourselves in order to have like thriving communities. Like if I'm just like, let me let someone else handle this. Like, no, when you're in an actual community, it's based on mutuality and trust, and I contribute things, I receive, I give, I take, like that's community. And so there's no manager. Like maybe there are certain people who are responsible for certain things, but when you think about how communities are structured, like real communities, like you don't have someone who's responsible for saying hello to everyone every day. Like no, that's everyone's responsibility. Like, and I think like I don't know when that happened, that it was like we need like these people to be like they're like fire starters at like a bar mitzvah,
Hype men. Go, let's
Yeah.
go. You got cold sparks.
We don't need that. If we're trying to build like a true community here, that's not authentic. So I don't know. That's another.
I love that analogy, by the way. Like, we don't need the people with sparklers and bottles at Las Vegas Cabanas as our community managers.
Yeah. I mean, you can have that person, but like, let's call them that, they're the hype man, and like, let's call it that, because then people get it. Like, that's not like, I think we just need to be more realistic about the roles and responsibilities on the actual members of the community. Like, we are all responsible for community management in the same way that like we are all also responsible for Shilling. Like, if you decentralize Shilling, it's just literally me telling you about a thing that I'm excited about, which is so powerful. Like,
word of mouth marketing.
it is. And word of mouth marketing, like, that was like what made social media so cool. But then it became, we put a price on it. But we've got an opportunity in Web3. Like, you don't need a price on it because you're a token holder. So like, you're incentivized to market already. And that built-in incentive is really powerful. And really, I think what's going to disrupt, or is already disrupting, traditional social media marketing or performance marketing. Because like, there's an incentive for me to talk about this stuff because I'm a contributor and I'm an owner, and that's really revolutionary.
How do you distinguish, though? Because coming from I think all of this was born out of NFT communities, by the way, which we needed to pave the way. I get it, to realize the power of co-creation and building a community and stuff like that. But like, when I was in Deadfellas and I was gung ho on Deadfellas and it was, worth whatever, 4 ETH or whatever, I was all like posting on there, Deadfellas is the best. I got GM, like, boom, boom, boom. Here's my fellas. This is my favorite fella. Da, 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 da. Now, when I see people do that, I cringe.
Yeah. Well, I was kind of always cringing. I was fascinated by what was happening. I was like, this is ridiculous. You're this photo of this ape. Like, I was never into NFTs. NFT, and like, people are like, now they're like, the word utility is like, whatever, but like, no, like, it's not utility. It's like you're part of a community. What can we do together? What can we create? Shilling, for the purposes of just driving up your token price, like, or your NFT floor, like, that is not what I mean. I mean, like, you are excited about what you're doing with this community, what you guys are co-creating. And I think those people like aped into things based off of the price, and like a roadmap that might not have been like fully baked. Again, like, it's funny, like, you had a manifesto and a roadmap and like a bunch of money. And then it's funny, like, at Gitcoin, we talk about this a lot because it became really easy to raise funds and then really hard to figure out how to distribute them based off of like how these communities were created. So, and then prices just went, just plummeted. And so then Treasury, like, it created like a lot of challenges for these communities to like build something like sustainable. But also, like, you recruited a bunch of community members on like the basis of what? And so I think that's, again, why like kind of like vision and strategy become really important, both of them, because vision is one thing, but if you don't have like a plan for how to get there, that's like actually realistic, and doesn't rely. And I think, again, I'm not like hating on we needed them to pave the way. I totally agree with that. But I think when you look back at like what a lot of those roadmaps were, but also like what the incentives were, like, the incentives were kind of like they were very heavy on things that like were probably not sustainable in terms of like cultivating real community and making money, or like reinvesting. Like I think I look at what Nouns is doing now, and it's really interesting. Although I have like I see the both sides, like the good and the bad of Nouns, but like they've created this like sustainable, like this flywheel of just like this like proliferation that also uh consistently means like recurring funds coming in. I think how they allocate those funds, and also like the makeup of that community, right, given the floor price, it I think there are definitely like some drawbacks, but I think like there's a mechanism there that that creates longevity. And I think they definitely have like it's the community is certainly like creating things, and like they've got this community that's like actively like in pursuit of like proliferating the meme, and like it all kind of ties together for me in terms of like what they say they're doing and what they're doing, and I think a lot of that was like lost with these NFT projects because they didn't really know what they didn't know. No one knew, and so I think I think there's a novelty to it, and there are certain projects that will always have that, right, being the first, but like in terms of like what they're becoming, I think like we can only have so many that are trying to be the next like Disney or something, or the next like like the next Jam City, the next major gaming company, and I think they're I don't really know what the internal makeup or decision making rights or like how those organizations are actually structured. But I certainly know the DAOs that I'm a part of, like we decide on things together, and like we are also like working as like teams, and it's really hard. But like I think the DAO space is like much more poised for like more meaningful like innovation potentially. I don't know. I vacillate because I'm also like, a DAO is not an ideal structure to ship product, but I'm watching it happen in real time, and it's making me more optimistic. And I also think that like the like innovation in a DAO like environment is like is rampant. Like there are just so many ideas, and you can like spin up ideas. You can immediately kind of concept test them and iterate. So I just love like DAOs as a model for that. And I think a lot of these NFT projects are sort of shifting and trying to shift into like true DAOs. And I think that will sort of like time will only tell. Like your company, your or your organization is called Dead Fellas. Like, what does that mean? Like, what do you stand for? Like, what are you going to build? Like, if you're a DAO, like, I don't know. I think they have to define that. And I think a lot of them are figuring out what that looks like, what that sustainable model looks like.
Yeah, I think I'm the more I talk about DAOs, the more I consider it kind of similar to the term Web3, which is like, it's just a super easy term for everybody to recognize how people organize in Web3, like, or organize in this space. Like Web3 was like everything from blockchain, right? which really should have been really is the third iteration of the web, a separate conversation. But DAOs are really just, this is the way people congregate and make things happen in this space.
DAOs are co-ops. Like,
but they're not really, most of them are not really DAOs. They're not really.
Well, yeah, we've got a lot of dinos out, DAO in name only. I love that term.
Wait, what was that?
Dinos, DAO.
I haven't heard that. I love that.
Just dropping all the knowledge. Yeah, and I've been part of those too. I think like there's like when you think about like different structures, like a like decentralized work, like you don't have to be a full DAO to really like embody these practices. I think there will be lots of like a DAO, like the label DAO encompasses a lot of definitions, and like a lot of DAOs are still trying to figure out what being a DAO means to them, and then a lot of non-DAOs are figuring out how do we DAO. And I think like this is also ever evolving in real time, and I think like what is cool about the DAO space is that I feel like they're all very actively like watching each other and like talking to one another. at least I hope, and I think we're seeing more of that need for like DAOs to get together and be like, what are you thinking about this stuff, and like here's how we approach this, and I think that's really cool, because like we have seen DAOs learn from like past DAOs mistakes, or like their successes, and I think that's really great. I think that like the idea of like a decentralized autonomous organization, like the co-ops were like the first version of a DAO, or like unions even. Like my dad was he was the president of a labor union, and I grew up like with a lot of the same language that we use in the DAO space, like with that just like being like talk at the dining room table. And I think like these are not crazy new things. Like so much of this is tied to like human psychology, right? Or and game theory, or swarm theory, like all of these things. And I think that we're still kind of figuring it out. And like we as humans like to put labels on things. Like that's what we like to do. And I think that we need to like further decentralize these concepts, right? And like leave room for more interpretations, because like there's not one single. I mean, I could go off on a tangent right now talking about the definition of public goods, right? Like there are the official definitions, and then there are the definitions that the people decide. And like that happens all the time. People like remix things, and certainly happens with brand all the time. And that's like the goal, right? Like that's what you want to see. You want people to put their spin on it. And if we treat these things like so preciously, I think it kind of like kills the momentum and kills the magic. And so I do think like Web3 is like embracing this like sort of this idea of like organizations as like these living, breathing like biomes or like organisms. And I think that's really cool. And that means that like evolution will inherently happen. It's embedded into what we're doing. And I think we're kind of seeing that, but it's all tied to like it didn't just start with Web3. It's like tied to lots of these, like, there's so many references throughout history that you can look at, you can point to and say, oh yeah, I see that in Web3 and like certain ideologies. And I think that's because we're trying to figure out like more meaningful ways to work together, to connect, to build, to really like have like meaning in our lives and have a better world. And so I think it's no surprise that it's tied to these like very like there's just it's everything that we've ever done as humans has brought us to, as humans and as like there's so much that's just like in Web3 that is like based in nature, right? And I think like that's that looking at all of that and taking that into consideration, it makes it okay that like we don't have all the answers kind of figured out, and that we are sort of like evolving.
Yeah, that is very interesting. I kept thinking of a somewhat word, because we got to put labels on things, right? Ecosystems.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, I think again, community, ecosystems, like these words are also sort of like culture. Like these are like words that are being kind of
I'm being a bit selfish here, by the way, too. I just had a cast on Warpcast. Like, what do you call groups of people that have shared values, that have pools of capital, that are trying to effectuate an end that aligns with those values? And I think right now you'd call it a DAO, but like in reality, what is that? And then also on top of that, how are they connected?
Yeah, totally. I mean, and you think about like the ecosystem, right? Like you could be what are the level? It's like ecosystem, and there's like biome, like there's all like biosphere. Like if you think about like levels in nature, like it's all still connected to like whatever, like the smallest cell, right? And cells operate like a lot of different like a lot of organisms operate, right? So I think thinking about like organizations like that is really interesting. And like we are very much like all sort of interconnected, and we're even more interconnected when you're thinking about like being on chain, right? And what chain you're on and how those chains communicate with each other. And I think that's really cool. I also think what's cool is that we can now like really look at these networks in like, and looking at like sort of I love like knowledge graphs and like social knowledge graphs especially, but like thinking about like how we're all interconnected and how we can now like visualize that in an even more compelling way with on-chain data. It's just like really powerful to see, and like seeing kind of the ripple effects of the work that we do is really cool. But yeah, I mean, like definitely anything that I love any sort of labels or metaphors that tie to nature, because I feel like that's like it feels right, like we want to get closer to nature in the work that we're doing as humans. So I think I'm on board with the ecosystem language, but I think like that when you talk to anyone outside of Web3, it might not like hit as clearly, you know? And so when you're like, we're a tool for building ecosystems or what, I mean, the marketing jargon in the space, I'm like, I can't anymore. Like strip it out. Like I was reading an article in the LA Times the other day about this guy that decentralized his podcast. He sold it to the employees. And I was like, cool. If DAOs could market, like this article could be about any DAO. There's no Web3 language, or it could be about any sort of like a DAO or an NFT, like whatever it is. Like it was just like very much like, oh, I'm a normal person and I get this. Like the concepts were all there. The shared owner, all of it was like very well like unpacked. And I was like, but then you start to add all these words that people get intimidated by, and then it like they're like, what? Or that they really don't understand. Or you get too hung up on this broad vision, once again, that people can't really see themselves in it, or like they can't see the reality. Like, okay, but what does that mean? What does that mean for me in my day-to-day? One of my, I feel like, favorite tweets that I ever tweeted out was like, you know, brand vision, save the world, product reality, save user time and money. And like, that's what I think like we all kind of have to start thinking about in this space if we want to actually like, if we want to be around, right? Like we have to find a way to like, you know, like resonate with people and continue to grow. And I'm not saying grow, like proliferate, like insane hockey stick growth, this like fabricated growth that we've seen. Cause I'm not advocating for that, but like, I think we know how small the space is. Like we need to continue to grow it. And also like these organizations need to continue to figure out ways to grow sustainably. And they need to figure out ways to regenerate as well. And I think regenerative systems also are like embedding those into our organizations. And like, that means like coming up with like new ways to like fund these initiatives and then allocate capital, like all of that. It's all interconnected. But I think it really like, it really starts with like thinking about how we tell stories that are going to like resonate with the people that we want to build with. So yeah, sorry, I kind of went off on a tangent there.
Tangents are the freaking best. I embrace all tangents. I will never stop.
My brain kind of just works like that. I'm like here and then over there. And then I'm, you know, it's just like, again, that like dot connection factor.
Oh, I love that. I mean, look, at the end of the day, everything's kind of connected in some way, shape, or form. If you've ever watched, I have to recommend any type of documentary on fungus.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I mean,
quite interesting.
Branding. It's all about our sort of the concept around the new branding is biomimetic magic. So it has to do with like mycelial networks and mimetics and this idea of like nature, but also like nature is sort of equal parts math and magic, right? Like there's so much structure to it, but so much of it, it's like it's just why, it just is how it is. And yeah, like mycelial networks and fungi have been a huge influence like in the work that we're doing. But like also just in general, like I worked with a team at Coordinape on their rebrand, and like that, like mycelial networks were a huge source of inspiration behind that. And I think like there's that symbiosis. There's like just so much of how mycelial networks bloom is sort of the ambition that we have for these community or these organizations. And that's really beautiful and really inspiring to me, and something that I definitely like geek out on a lot, but also something that I think, resonates also with like people who are maybe not as involved on the tech side, but are more involved on like the art side, or like the the ideas that I think we want to embed in our organization don't just like attract necessarily like a single type of person, but they attract like different perspectives. And so kind of crafting stories, narratives, building brands that like can bring multiple like people who bring different perspectives and ideas as well as skills to the table is like also part of the goal. At the same time, it's like when you're developing like product narratives, they need to fulfill like specific goals and objectives, and you have to have very clear audiences in mind. I think sometimes that's the difference between like brand and product. But I think, you know, the brand can have a much more larger vision, and like you want contributors in your organization that aren't all, you know, devs or something, right? Even though your product might be specifically for devs, you know? And so I think that some of these ideas, right? Like when you talk about like nature and like harmony, like these are things that bring in, you know, people who, individuals who might be more excited about, you know, not necessarily the tech, but like the beauty of like the concepts, and they might want to be contributing like to art, or to, they might want to write, or like you, I mean, and I think like we need those people, and like those different like fibers come together to weave like a much more beautiful, you know, fabric, and strengthen, right? Like those fibers independently are, you know, weak, but together they're much stronger. And so I think like that's the idea. And I think brand is a really, like tying it back to brand is a really important tool for attracting those people.
So we've talked a lot about Gitcoin. I know what Gitcoin is. Some of my audience may not know what Gitcoin is. I'd love for you to kind of share high level what Gitcoin is, what you're doing there, and then I want to get into how you are rethinking what a community is, because I know you have some really interesting thoughts on that.
Yeah. So Gitcoin basically creates tools that enable communities to fund their shared needs. So, or really, I think we're sort of shifting to this language on like funding and protecting what matters. But essentially, the ambition of Gitcoin is to really bring about a better world that's like enabled by community-led positive change. So like communities really being the ones to change the world. And they can only do that if they have ways to effectively allocate capital, and also like effectively, safely allocate that capital. So like that kind of protection element comes into play there. So Gitcoin started a while, like 5 years ago, as you know, essentially a bounties platform, where open source software developers could come, you know, fulfill a bounty and get paid for it. Because at that point in time, there wasn't a lot of like funding for open source software. So, but the bounty model was like very like transactional, and didn't really like create. It wasn't like sustainable. So Gitcoin, actually inspired by Vitalik's paper on quadratic funding, they adopted this like quadratic funding model that would allow them to create a grants program, or a grants program model, that instead of, you know, essentially there's a matching pool that gets raised, and then that matching pool gets distributed based off of not the size of the donations the community received, but the number. So it really favors like the many over the few, right? So if you're a community, you participate in the grants program, you essentially do a crowd fund, right? You get your community to donate. They can donate in as little as like a dollar or whatever. You get them to donate. And then after the round closes, the communities that have the highest number of donors, not necessarily the highest amount, they get a larger size of the matching pool. So again, it's like a really novel mechanism, and Gitcoin has since been exploring other novel mechanisms for funding. We've got a new protocol that is launching called Allo Protocol. It's all about, you know, these different allocation mechanisms, and it's built on a series of different smart contracts that, you know, really are more closely tied to governance than anything else, but then have this like these allocation tools incorporated into them. So quadratic voting, quadratic funding, and then we're going to explore additional tools. So there's a really robust kind of product pipeline around enabling communities to allocate these funds and distribute them, whether it's more democratically or just more aligned with their mission and values. That was a little bit long-winded, but basically TLDR, Gitcoin is creating new mechanisms or new tools for communities to fund what matters to them.
How do you go out and market that in a way that people can understand? Because I'm sure you're not going to lead with quadratic voting by Vitalik Buterin.
I'm glad you brought that up, because we have been leading with quadratic funding, and I've been very like it is the how. It is absolutely the how. It is the magic. Well, not magical. It's very much real. It is the thing though that makes it possible. But what I often say to the team is like, people don't really care about the how. They care about like, what is the benefit to me? So a lot of what our new campaign is Fund What Matters, right? Like, what do you care about? Now go out and fund it, and I think that has really hit home with a lot of people. It has the sort of the real, right? The math of the fund mixed with like the magic, which is like the what matters. There's like an emotional connection to that. And then it comes about like, okay, then they're going to ask like, well, but like not how does it work, but like, how do I do that? And that's where it comes into like the product piece. And we run our biggest product to date has been, or product or whatever it is the grants program. So the program like has had a very different marketing strategy, right? Getting grantees in the door, getting matching pool donors, et cetera. Whereas like the protocol, we have to really break it down, like the what it is. And then we've actually built apps on top of the protocol that sort of sit in between the program and the protocol. And then we'll have to have like specific marketing for those apps. So it's all about like, who is the user, and then how do we tailor messages to them? So having a big overarching message, but then having sort of those product level messages. And we're working through that right now. But like, it's about getting like really specific around like the benefit and like how this matters to me. So kind of what I said before, like the save the world, save user time and money. So thinking about like how we position the products like that is, and we're also working on like new like kind of sub brand initiatives for our protocols as well. So that's all sort of like in play. And I think it's like a test and learn thing, right? Like we're testing out new tactics, new messages all the time, because what resonates with like the core Web3 regen, degen is not what like the UNICEFs of the world are going to care about. And we want them to partner with us too. So we have to sort of, it's kind of like titration or triage in a lot of ways. And that's kind of what we're doing on an ongoing basis, both from a marketing as well as from a product perspective. But yeah, so sort of we're evolving. That's what we say. We're always evolving.
Another new term, regen, degen. Love it.
Oh yeah, I mean the regens are they're our core and they're amazing, and it's a great community. But we are the opportunity, like an allo protocol. It's just expansive, it's limitless, and it's really about like wanting to get people who want to be creative and imagine new futures. And so we're trying to be more expansive in terms of how we also like talk to people as well.
That makes sense. So switching gears to the community side, I know you've done a lot of deep thinking about what it takes to be a community. And from our first conversation, I realized that it has to start on a very small scale, right? Mm-hmm. And start with maybe 4 or 5 people almost that are dedicated to this. And as you talked about community earlier in this conversation, my label that came up was the kind of intentional empowerment. Mm-hmm. And that like everybody wants to be a part of a community and they don't necessarily know how to contribute. So you've kind of got to build the rails for people that contribute in different ways. And by the way, that's not just marketing, sales, dev, whatever. It's like a good example for me is like, I'm not big on hopping in Discords and just talking about things, but I'm huge at being like, hey, you want to hop on a call? Let's chat. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So how do you think about community and building solid communities from the foundation up? And then how do you think about that idea of kind of intentional empowerment?
Yeah. I mean, I think that like a lot of communities do start with like, a couple of people. I started a women's, my friend and I started a women's community here in New York. And it literally started with like, I would meet different women in emerging tech And we would be like, oh, like they'd be like, want to grab coffee? And I just finally was like, I put them all in a group chat and I was like, all of you come to my house. Like, when can you come? And let's like let's just hang out. And like,
Love it.
it's called Her House. And like, that's what it has just become because it started like at my house. And it's a bunch of women. But like, there's that. And then it's like, okay, people like, people don't even oftentimes know what they're really good at contributing. So like, think about that. They don't even know. And then also you're just leaving it open-ended for them. So they're like, shit, like I don't even know what I could contribute.
It's like you're building self-awareness.
I know what I'm good at, but like, I don't know what you need and I don't know what I'm good. So like, you get a lot of people maybe in a Discord who are just sitting ducks. And so I think you have to kind of create opportunities, but also you have to create some, like, again, it comes back to like structure and like, you know, you can't like architect a community. I think it does evolve on its own. And you can't be like, we need this person for this, when you're just in those early stages of building. So it's hard, but I think it's about like communication. And so I think the most important thing is making sure that your community has the right tools for communicating with each other. And Discord, I think, expecting everyone to sit in a Discord is, how luxurious is that? Who has the time? I mean, I do because I work for DAOs, but like, no. And so I actually end up not participating in a lot of communities that I would love to participate in because they're only on Discord. And I only sit in Discord if someone's paying me to sit in Discord.
I was going to say it. I'm glad you did.
Like, come on. I don't like it. I don't like the interface. I think it's crazy that a lot of things, but like, what is that? What are those other touch points? Is it IRL events? I think local events are really important, creating space for people to come and like organically connect. I also think like smaller group chats. I think like, I find Telegram overwhelming, but like it's a reality of Web3. It's another platform that if you're personally contacting me on there, or if you're like a hobby community, like or a social community, I won't tune in and I'm there for work, you know? So I think that it's very different for every single person. So you need to like really, as you're building, you need to get to know what works for people. And then I think you need to like also like give them something that they can like get excited about, not just a vision, but like specific things that are happening. And you have to like kind of transparently communicate, and you have to create opportunities for people to see themselves in the work. And so I think, you know, as you get to know your community, also like, what are we building? Maybe thinking about how people can fit into it and like what people are good at as you learn. So I think it's like a blend again of like creating like very intentional like tooling, as well as like touch points, right? Like regular, like you want to keep momentum going. So you need regular touch points. And then enabling co-creation. And that doesn't mean like a call for someone to like do a task. It means like hey, I'm thinking about this thing. Anyone want to like jam on this? And like, I think like this idea of like a jam session with like intentional outcomes, like I think that's also like really powerful when it comes to like co-creating. And so it starts with that. It starts with like co-building something together and then creating those continuous touch points where you can continuously co-create. I think that's very important. And then it becomes about like, okay, oftentimes, okay, then we're building a product. So like, how do we structure incentives around that? And then how does ownership come into this? And then ownership starts to follow as you're building that community, because people want to know that their work is being valued. And I think honestly, like more DAOs need to think about compensation more intentionally, because to expect people to work for free indefinitely is just, especially like right now, yes, people will do it. They will. People will work for free, but you're also going to immediately cut out a bunch of people who won't. And that's going to suck for you. But also like, why are we expecting people to work for free? Like, that's just shit, you know? So I think like getting real about that. And if it is about like shared ownership, then be super transparent about the timelines and like stick to them, because otherwise you're kind of, you know, screwing people over. So I think like paid community is very different. That's if you're shaping, like if you're building something for a product. Organic community can still exist unpaid, but I think you need to know which one you're playing in, and be really real about that.
That makes a lot of sense. I keep thinking about how some communities will make a habit of giving an announcement for someone that came up with a really good idea that changed the way that they were structured, or an initiative, or added a new channel, which I think is a good start.
Yeah.
is it sustainable? I don't know, right?
Yeah.
How do you keep that person that has the good idea coming back again and again and again? I, you know, I've fallen victim to it myself, where I'm just like, well, that was fun, but now I've got this other thing I'm doing right now, and it doesn't involve being in your Discord for free.
Yeah. Yeah. I think again, when we move away from being a capitalist society, whenever that happens, maybe this can all, like, we can barter things. I don't know. We can compensate each other, but like, until that is a reality, like, I think we just need to get a little bit more real about that. And like, and yeah, like, what does it look like when you're just there hanging out versus you're there to actually, like, if you're there to hang, if you're there for the vibes and it's not about like shipping product and you're not trying to monetize, then that's very different from like, no, we're actually trying. So like Her House community, there's no compensation, there's no fee. We actually like will have like a gate for membership, but like it's just there, and like we're not trying to build products. So like there's no money here. So that's very different from like, no, we're trying to ship. And then you got to like think about your community very differently. And your community essentially is your contributors, and contributors should tie to compensation. I think Gitcoin has done an amazing job at that for the DAO, but then thinking about wider community, right? Because there are rings of community, right? There's not just your contributors. How do we keep them engaged? And they're not doing things though. They're not building stuff. They're just they are either users, or they're an audience, or they're people who are passionate about it. They might be token holders. Like, again, though, that comes back to like incentives. And I think incentive structures like at different layers or levels of community are really important to think about, because like compensation is one incentive, but then there are many others, and figuring out which ones work for which layers, and like which, or maybe not layers. I think there can be layers, but then there's also like a pod model of communities where it's like, I'm in this sort of sub community, but I'm also in this one, and like this one's doing one thing and this one's doing a different thing. But like, I think those different structures and then aligning incentives with those different structures is sort of the future of how we think more intentionally about community, and not just putting everyone into this like catch-all. Like, and I think Discord is a great example. Like, we just thrown everyone into a Discord, and like, that's not community, And so facilitating these other opportunities that are really in tune with what people are looking to get out of the community. And I don't know, like, I don't know if people come to communities looking to get more than community out of it, but we've slapped this label on a lot of these things, and they're doing way more than like community. Like, so I think, it's very different. It's like very depending on like, again, like goals, objectives, and like, outputs. You need sort of different incentives and different community structures.
Yeah, I think if you like goes back to what we were talking about earlier, when you take a step back, it's just a group of people that have shared values, shared interests, getting together, and there is a pool of capital that was started. Like, like whether those people are actually voting to spend it, that depends on like what type of community it is. But like, maybe the word's not community, maybe it's not DAO. Maybe there is a better word for that. Maybe it's a society. I don't know, right? Like, it can go anywhere, but that's the basis. And so if you take it from that basis, then you can build out the incentive structures, hopefully at some point, to figure out how to keep that group of people together, which is just really the ultimate goal.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's like fascinating to see like what people come up with and what they prioritize in terms of what they want to build. And like, no shade on certain communities wanting to build things that like,
doing the best they can do.
Yeah, like they pooled the capital, and if they vote on it, then like that's great. Or like if however they choose. And I think that's why thinking of new ways of allocating capital is really compelling. But I think also just like, we also don't need to get so hung up on the words. Like, people are like, well, it's not a community, or like, it is. It's just like, what's the work? What are you doing? Do the work. Just do the work. Like, or do.
They're trying to get more followers.
Don't, like, I think that again is this like propensity, right? Like, we are so hardwired to like grow and build and like all of these things. And like, you could just hang, you could just do nothing. Do you even need a pool of capital? Like, what is it? And I think again, like,
I'll tell you, one of my favorite use cases is just recreating the salon.
Right? Oh, totally.
right? Like, and that doesn't require any type of business or anything. It's literally just people in there vibing out, loving a thing,
We're
loving
actually, yeah,
discussing that thing.
that's literally what her house was like. We called them like living room sesh. And that's like what we were doing a lot. And like people really respond to that. And now we're taking that concept, and we're like, I'm actively like I've done this with other smaller groups. Like I've like packed out as they do these great kickbacks, and like there's just all these other like work, but that's what people want. People have like conference fatigue. They want to get together, congregate, share ideas. And then if like they choose to fund one of those ideas together, that's cool. But I think like the salon itself, like that can be free, or that can be communally owned without being communal. Like, like you paid for the snacks this week, I'm going to pay for the snacks next week, whatever it is. But like we're thinking about that too at Gitcoin. We've got this Shelling Point conference, or it's sort of like an extension of like we'll do it as a day at ETH Denver, or we partner with Protocol Labs and Funding the Commons to do a stage one year. And now we're thinking about what are the other formats of this? Because like the idea of a Shelling Point is really just that. It's creativity, it's idea sharing, it's like energizing each other, it's connecting. And with like, again, a lot of the time shared values and shared goals. And so like the salon format is actually one that we're thinking about. Like, how can we introduce this? And we can like, therefore not have one Shelling Point per or two per year, but we can have lots of them, and we can decentralize this idea that, and we can have localized Shelling Points. And like that is what's also like, again, decentralization. I just love that as a concept, because like, yeah, then Shelling Point could be happening here in Brooklyn, and we can be talking about how to, instead of like funding, the next like funding the next big open source software platform or whatever, we can talk about how we're going to fight food sovereignty, or fight food deserts in Bushwick, and like that's like the power of what we're doing here. It's like that can actually happen, and that's really cool. And I feel like the term like touch grass has become so like, it's just like, it's so cringe now. But like all of these DAOs could benefit from like a touch grass moment where you're like, how is what we're doing actually impacting like my community, like my real community, like the community that I live in, like the place where like, if you've got where your kids go to school, or, the restaurant, your favorite restaurant, like that's like really like the applications of this technology and the things that we're building in that sense is like also just so compelling and so exciting for me. And like that's like how we also connect these like internet communities back to like the real communities, which I think is really, really cool.
And it's necessary.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
We're not going to change the world with protocols. Yes, protocols underlying foundational tech of how we can change the world, but like people need to use them, or people need to use what's on them, or what's on them needs to benefit real people in the real world. Yeah. Otherwise, like I don't know. I mean, we could just all go to Mars with Elon and just let everybody just leave them in the dust. But I'm not of that camp. I'm very much of the let's actually like use what we're doing to really change things on the ground, and because we can, and that's really exciting.
Love that. You've got me all fired up over here. I think there's going to have to be a post conversation. There's some ideas that are swelling in my head.
Love it.
We're kind of rounding out the hour here, and I have these two traditional closing questions that I have ask every single guest. The first one is, how do you describe Web3?
Ooh. Web3 is it's a means to a new end, or it's sort of the underlying technology for enabling new ways of sharing ownership and collaborating. That's not super compelling. Again, like I think I think the point of defining Web3 is that like it is different for who you're talking to. So I can't come up with some generic definition because it's going to sound, I'm trying to encompass all of these things. But if I was going to describe Web3 to a brand, I'd be like, this is a new foundational layer of your marketing tech stack. Like this is like new ways of cultivating loyalty, building relationships, and rewarding customers. Like that is very different from how I would describe it to, someone who is looking to use crypto as a new, currency for their community. Like, so I think that I'm going to give you a single definition of Web3, but if you want to talk about specific ones, I'm here for that.
That's why I changed the question, actually. I used to say, how do you define Web3? Now I say, how do you describe Web3?
Oh, describe Web3. Oh, yeah. Okay. Okay. I don't know. That's a nuance that I feel like my answer still holds up for that.
It does. No, it does. And yeah, I wasn't necessarily looking for a response to that. I think the point of it is that it does depend on who you are and who you are talking to. Yeah, right. Absolutely. Everybody came into this space for a different reason. Yeah. Right. And they're sticking around. If they're on my show, they're sticking around for a different reason. Yeah. Trying to serve a community or what have you. Yeah. Or a purpose or an impact or, trying to better their business. Right. All those things are legitimate reasons to leverage this, what is ultimately a technology change. The final question's forward looking. So you get to have some fun. It is, where do you see yourself in this space in the next 6 to 12 months? And then where do you see yourself in the space in the next 5 to 10 years?
6 to 12 months, definitely still working with the organizations that I'm currently working with, and also hopefully doing some like pilots outside of Web3 with whether or not it's with those orgs, but like with some Web 2 and Web3, and like taking on hopefully like a bigger project with an established Web 2 brand that wants to collaborate with someone or something that I'm working on in Web3, for sure. And I think that's definitely possible. I'm really optimistic about that. And then what was the next time period?
5 to 10 years. Have fun.
Ooh, 5 to 10 years. Oh, I hope I'm retired by then. No, I'm just kidding. I could never retire. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm like not, it's funny, like being a strategist, I'm like 5 to 10 years, like who knows? I hope that I am still like I hope that I'm just feeling like balanced. I think that's been one thing that I've been increasingly looking for more in my like career. And when I say balance, I mean like just like fulfillment, like feeling like I get to do all the things that I want to do and make money that supports the lifestyle that I want. But I think like 5 to 10 years, hopefully still working in emerging tech, and hopefully still with a variety of creative outlets, because I think those two things are where I get like the most fulfillment, but doing it equally, with people that I, really admire and appreciate and aspire to be like, because I'm certainly surrounded by people like that right now. And it's really motivating and exciting and invigorating.
I love that. What a wonderful way to close. Thank you for coming on.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. This was great.
Thanks for tuning in to Web3 with me. If you enjoyed the show and want to help us grow, please hit the subscribe button on YouTube or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you want to connect with me personally, you can find me on Twitter @Zach_French_.